Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for attending today's event, welcoming Syrian, Afghan, and other refugees to South Florida. I am Lanier Robbins, Secretary of the Board of Directors for the World Affairs Council of Miami. The World Affairs Council of Miami is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose purpose is to improve and sustain public awareness and understanding of global issues while exploring new ideas and policy solutions into the world's most pressing challenges. The conversation regarding refugees and the efforts to welcome them to South Florida is an important issue that we are so appreciative to have a panel of experts to offer their insights on today. But before we begin today's program, I would like to welcome the President of the World Affairs Council of Miami, Aaron Rosen, to offer a few words to our audience on this topic.
Thank you, Lanier. With crises around the world continuing to disrupt people's lives, whether nearby in Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, or further away in Afghanistan, Syria, the African Sahel, and beyond, understanding the challenges facing refugees today remains urgent. Despite humanity's ongoing efforts, the United Nations estimates there to be around 26 million refugees around the world today, about half of whom are under 18. And that figure rises dramatically when including people who are internally displaced. That's why we believe it critical for us here in South Florida to take this topic up today, to learn about those who have come here and made our home their home and how we can best be of help. To that end, we're extremely thankful to our event partners and our panelists for the insights and resources they'll share with us today. We hope you leave this afternoon's event empowered and ready to help make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And moving into the program, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Kevin Hunting. Kevin is a humanist, a conscious leadership coach, and the founder of 2 Steps Forward Coaching. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello. Hi, hey, Lanier. Hello, everyone. I am so grateful to be here with you today, and I thank you again for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. Also, again, just a huge thanks to the World Affairs Council of Miami and our other event partners for highlighting such an important topic during Welcome Week, and especially given the recent events in Afghanistan. For those who don't know, Welcome Week takes place from the 10th through the 19th of September and is supported by Welcoming America. It is a time when organizations, communities are being brought together and neighbors of all backgrounds, including refugees, to build stronger connections and affirm the importance of welcoming and inclusive places in achieving collective prosperity. We really want to create as much engagement and energy as possible throughout today's event, so please feel free to submit relevant questions to our panelists at any time. And you can do that just by asking questions using the Q&A function at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. All right, let's get started. We have 3 extremely talented panelists with us, each one helping to support refugees, regardless of their background, and doing the work to ensure that they are seen, embraced, welcomed, and included in our communities. To begin, we have Nancy Jackson, who is currently the District Director of the Office of Miami-Dade County and a former United Nations Senior Program Officer for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, also known as UNHCR. So Nancy, I'd love to welcome you.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks, Lanier, and thanks, Aaron, and thanks to you, Kevin, for hosting this event. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely, thanks for being here. So I'd love to start by exploring the topic at a global level, sort of beginning with that sort of macro level of moving and then moving to the national level with David, and then ending, I think, with Kristen, where we're going to focus more on that local level here in South Florida. So to begin, Nancy, just what are some of the common reasons why individuals become refugees?
Yeah, I think when you look at the numbers and the countries where people come from, it becomes very apparent why people become refugees. Unfortunately, war is the #1 reason. You know, a refugee is a person who is leaving their home country for fear of persecution because of race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or a political opinion. So when there's great upheaval and the state is no longer providing protection to refugees, in fact, they may be persecuting their own countrymen and women, people are obliged to flee. So I think when we're looking at back to 2020, we have, it is a global problem. There are currently 20 million plus refugees under the mandate of UNHCR, the refugee agency of the UN. 68% of those come from 5 countries. So when I name those countries, you all will know why they're fleeing. Syria, 27% of the world's refugees in 2020 came from Syria. That's about 7 million. Venezuela, we were talking about our nearby conflicts, about 4 million. Afghanistan, so this is 2020. Afghanistan has, unfortunately, a 4-decade history of being a country in war and therefore a country of refugees. South Sudan and Myanmar. When we think about Myanmar, we think about the Rohingya being persecuted for their ethnicity and their religion. We can think of other cases where people experience that kind of persecution. The former Yugoslavia, Burundi, Rwanda were terrible examples. So those are the whys people are fleeing. They fear for their lives, honestly.
Thanks for sharing that. And again, just as to me, this shows the urgency of this particular topic and really the needs that are around it. Also the complexities. It is a pretty complex topic when you really get into the details. So my next question for you is, could you please share the role that typically the UNHCR would play in supporting refugees?
Yeah, the UNHCR has a really important role, which is really the guarantor of protections and human rights around the world. You know, UNHCR was created in the aftermath, as was the 1951 Convention on Refugees. All of this was a response to World War II, right? So the UNHCR was tasked with figuring out and dealing with all the mass movements of people after World War II. So they have a dual role, the mandate of protection, which means that people will have the right to seek asylum, they will have the right to leave their country, the borders will remain open, and there's a very important principle, which is the principle of no return. So UNHCR works very closely with countries that are bordering in conflict areas in particular, but all around the world, to make sure that as people cross into a border, they're not returned to their home country to face actual danger. So that's a big part of, and the most important part of UNHCR's mandate is to uphold that international system of refugee and asylum. The other side of it, the side that I worked on, was the assistance side. And that is, how do you assist refugees once they've left the country? Because of course, the UN and the international community, people who have signatories to the 1951 convention, are obliged by that convention to help and to support. So countries provide funding. There's a whole network of nonprofit interfaith groups that help, and UNHCR oversees that. So it can be assistance to live temporarily in the bordering country. That's the majority of how refugees are helped by UNHCR. It can be, when the circumstances permit, the voluntary repatriation back to their home country, because that's obviously the goal that we're after, that war secedes, countries become more stable, and people can return home. Nobody is trying to leave their home and everything Absolutely. They love behind. They want to go back when they can. And integrating and becoming a citizen is something that UNHCR would help people do. So that, for example, happened when I was in Mexico working with Guatemalan refugees at the end of the 1990s. Many people returned home, but a big chunk of them stayed in Mexico, became naturalized Mexican citizens. Obviously, that's also a really good solution. And then the fourth thing that UNHCR helps with is resettlement, which is what we're going to be talking about today with David. IRC is a fundamental partner in refugee resettlement around the world. But that, I do want to let people know, is a minuscule portion of refugees are resettled. It's really meant for the most vulnerable. The vast majority are living in temporary camps or other locations in bordering countries. awaiting repatriation or another solution.
And one last question I have, which I thought was, for me seems so interesting to understand, is how does the UNHCR really determine which countries are accepting refugees or accept refugees?
That's very interesting. Countries volunteer. The UNHCR does not oblige. They don't have a mechanism to actually enforce. That's not how it works. It's all about cooperation, working together with partners who have signed up for the job, right? If you've signed a convention, you're meant to be helping refugees. So I think part of it is organic. People flee, they go to bordering countries. So that is why we have our major hosting countries, which in 2020 were Turkey, Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, Germany. So some of that is circumstance. Pakistan is next to Afghanistan. Turkey is bordering Syria. Turkey right now is the #1 host for Syrian refugees. So there's that natural part of it. They're also signatories to the 51 convention, but it's volunteer. And that's where it comes in that countries really need to step up and support not only the concepts and the human rights, but with money and funds to help stabilize countries, help support countries that are receiving refugees. That is really the obligation of the world community, because these host countries cannot do it on their own.
Absolutely. And then this may be more of a personal question, but I love getting personal as a conscious leadership coach. What has been your inspiration and your kind of big why as to how you got involved with refugees, with the UNHCR? Was there something that happened, or was there something that you just inspired you? I'd love to hear from you what gets you so excited and passionate about being a part of this.
That's a great question. I'm a pretty big social justice person my whole life. In the 1980s, in our country, there was a sanctuary movement for refugees coming from Central America. I was in college and I was very interested in that movement because unfortunately during that time, the US government was not giving refugee status to a large number of Central American refugees who were fleeing civil war in Central America. And so church groups and nonprofits were helping those people stay safe, getting them to Canada, who was accepting them as refugees. And that really inspired me, the importance of helping people and supporting human rights at this most basic level. And I just would like to leave a little thought on that, Kevin, because this is the World Affairs Council of Miami, and I know everybody here is super interested in foreign affairs and global affairs. The questions that we're seeing now at our southern border are really directly connected to that beginning piece in the 1980s, when the US government took a political stance around refugees, and we're seeing the fallout of that all these years later. It's an endless vicious cycle, and unless countries step in and help stabilize and become part of the solution, the problems don't go away.
Absolutely. That was so powerful what you just shared in terms of your personal experience and how that's ignited your passion to play in the space and really make a huge contribution. So lastly, what other important information, if any, would you like to share? Anything that we didn't touch on, or something that you think would be really, relevant or important to share?
I think it's really a message that our current High Commissioner, Filippo Grandi, who's the first High Commissioner who comes from within the staff. In the past, that's always been a sort of diplomatic position. And I actually worked with Filippo in the field when I was back in my day, and he's an outstanding person. And it's really about, this is Welcome Week. We are very glad and proud and honored that we get to welcome refugees to our country and to our community. But we must not forget the people who've been left behind. There are 39 million Afghans in Afghanistan, and he's right now working, and the whole international community, to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. We need to assist the people who are there to make sure they have enough food, that the health system doesn't collapse, so that people can stay and survive. So we welcome people who are coming, but we can't forget those who are left behind.
And lastly, just to touch on this, is there, if people want to get involved, any ideas and recommendations from you on how people can get more involved?
Yeah, I would really encourage people who are interested in learning more about the refugee system and UNHCR's work to just go to the UNHCR, USA for UNHCR website. I was visiting it in preparation for this. They have outstanding resources, information. You can donate, you can learn. I think just interacting on that level, and I'll put in the little link in the chat box so everybody can take a look at that. I think being supportive and being involved, understanding what it means when I would say following, as you all are, what our government is doing foreign policy wise, because it matters in the end of the day. Those would be my two recommendations, but UNHCR and USA for UNHCR, which is the kind of foundation that supports UNHCR, is a great group to check out. And if you have the means, by all means.
Thank you so much for all that really great information that you've shared. All right, we're gonna move on now and bring it down to more of a national level. And I'd love to introduce David Oliver. David is the new Deputy Director in Florida for the International Rescue Committee, also known as IRC. And so welcome, David.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Glad to have you. So just starting again, more thinking at the national kind of level here in the US, what role does the IRC really play with the US State Department in resettling refugees?
Right. Yes, the IRC, first of all, is an international organization, as the name suggests, the International Rescue Committee. On the national level in the US, the IRC is one of 9 national organizations that have a contractual agreement with the State Department. It is called the Cooperative Agreement. Through this cooperative agreement, the IRC and the other 8 agencies provide very robust, comprehensive resettlement services for those refugee families that have gone through the vetting process, gone through the very rigorous, oftentimes years-long process overseas, and have been admitted into the US, really invited by the US to come and resettle. And so through that cooperative agreement, the IRC, each field office, and there is a field office in Tallahassee in Florida, and we hope to open a new field office in Miami as well. But we provide all the essential critical resettlement integration services that a family needs. And it really is a long list of services, as you can imagine. And it starts from before a family arrives. It starts with caseworkers preparing an apartment that is appropriate for that family, furnishing the apartment, setting up, filling up the pantry with food, getting a lot of appointments scheduled ahead of time as much as possible. Once the family arrives, we conduct multiple orientations focused on safety, focused on cultural orientation, the school system, the healthcare system. Our caseworkers help ensure that all the school-age children get enrolled in school, that every single family member completes the health vaccinations that they started overseas as a requirement in terms of coming to the US. And oftentimes there are vaccination follow-ups that they need to complete. And really the list goes on. I don't want to skip over employment. However, employment is a critical piece of the integration process. And we have dedicated employment specialists that work one-on-one with each employable adult to identify their skills and identify appropriate job opportunities. And those employment specialists also serve the other hat that they wear in their job is kind of outward facing and working with employers and companies that need to staff up and that are looking to fulfill their staffing needs.
Thank you for giving us sort of a broader picture of what this looks like at the national level. And who determines then where refugees are getting settled once they arrive in the US? And what is that? Share a little bit about what that process looks like as well.
Sure. Yes, that process, so there are multiple steps to it. Essentially, when a family has been identified as a refugee, with refugee status, they meet all the eligibility criteria, they've gone through those steps. then there is a meeting that takes place on the national level between those 9 resettlement agencies. In terms of identifying the appropriate place for that particular family, and also which agency will be able to provide resettlement services. At that point, it's pretty much at an individual level in terms of that particular family, what their needs are, where they're from, and their language needs. Some agencies have stronger capacity in certain languages and certain cultures than other. Some agencies have more capacity in certain locations compared to others. But also really top priority is looking at any possible family ties that refugee family has. And so if they have a strong family tie in, let's say, Sacramento, then that location is very much prioritized.
Oh, I mean, having that connection, right? That familial connection really helps, I'm sure, in a whole process that I'm sure can just be so disruptive, right? On so many levels, on that human level, on really disruptive on, I think, a very human level.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So what would you say are some of the biggest or major hurdles facing refugees as they're going through this process, the resettlement process? I know there's a litany of them, but what would you highlight as maybe the 2 that are either the most pressing or maybe the most challenging?
Sure. Well, I often think of the 3, I don't want to say pillars, but the 3 main challenges. 2 of them are very common for anyone, any non-refugee. Really, they're common for any low-income American. So one is transportation. If someone does not have their own transportation, that is extremely limiting. And different cities and municipalities have varying degrees of robustness when it comes to their public transportation system, right? So transportation is a limitation often for newly arrived refugees. And that's something that the IRC and other agencies work very hard to overcome through a lot of different means. Another is childcare. Again, very normal challenge that low-income Americans experience as well. The third is what is often the case is limited English. And so that is not always the case. There are clients that come from a variety of countries that have strong levels of English, many do not. And so that is a core component. Really, all 3 of those challenges are incorporated into our cooperative agreement. It's a core component of our resettlement services, is making sure that those barriers are addressed. And so all adult arrivals are enrolled in English as a second language classes, for example. Many IRC offices and other agencies have even more robust adult education programs available.
Excellent. And I know, I can only imagine, right? Many refugees, even again on a global scale, are maybe extremely vulnerable, right? They are, in terms of when they're arriving, and they're more subject. I know that in terms of numbers, there's a higher rate of like being subject to human trafficking, manual labor, sexual exploitation. And so can you speak just in broad terms around what measures are typically taken to ensure their safety?
Yes, and I briefly mentioned earlier, and I'll kind of emphasize the orientations, first of all, that we provide all newly arrived families. And these orientations take place, some of them take place on day 1. We also recognize that day 1 is a stressful day for these families, and they have been traveling for sometimes 48 hours. And so our methodology, our approach is repeat, repeat, repeat. So we provide safety orientation covering all kinds of critical topics, including risk of abuse, including risk of exploitation in the workforce. And we also provide, in addition to these orientations, we provide a more robust 3 or 4 day long cultural orientation where many of those topics are repeated. In addition to that, we provide employment orientation that covers some of those more employment specific topics. And so with just the emphasis of information, and also ensuring always with all of our services that they are provided in a culturally competent manner with in-language interpreters is key to make sure clients fully understand.
Amazing. So this is the question I love, so I'm going to get personal with you as well. I'd love to maybe hear from you what has inspired you to really, commit yourself to this theme, this whole idea around refugees or resettlement. What was did something happen? What really drove you to put your heart and soul into this work?
If you look at my career path, it kind of meandered, and I fell into this. It wasn't necessarily something that was planned out years in advance, but when I did come across the opportunity at the IRC, and this was in Atlanta, most of my time at IRC, which has been 15 years, was in the Atlanta office. My first role was being an employment specialist, and I had the opportunity to work one-on-one with refugee adults from all over the world. And it was it was motivating, inspiring, just a very culturally enriching experience, really understanding just the magnitude of the barriers that they face, but also seeing the resilience and seeing the gumption and the dedication, the perseverance for them to overcome those barriers, to provide for themselves and for their family was just incredibly inspiring. So, on a social justice level, this absolutely resonates with me. And also on a more personal level, it's extremely enriching. Working with clients directly and learning about their stories. I'm not in that position anymore. I don't provide direct services. And so now my source of inspiration is the team and my colleagues. They're incredibly inspiring. And many of them are refugees or former refugees themselves, and they are giving back to the community. And so that's just a really fantastic environment to work in.
That's beautiful. And I'd love to hear maybe more about, now that you're here in Florida, right? You're in this new role. What has been maybe your focus, let's say in the next 90, 120 days, where is it that you'll be focusing your team and efforts?
Right. We have a lot of exciting initiatives underway. So maybe I'll zoom out first and say the two IRC offices in Florida, one in Tallahassee, the other is in Miami. The Tallahassee office is relatively new. We opened in 2015. And we provide refugee resettlement services there. The IRC Miami office actually opened in the 60s and has had refugee resettlement services for decades, up until a few years ago, when unfortunately, because of funding and because of detrimental policies, that side of IRC Miami unfortunately closed its operations. We are still present, and we provide services for survivors of trafficking and unaccompanied minors. All that said, we are very hopeful. We submitted an application to the State Department to relaunch resettlement services in Miami, because it is a really it's a very welcoming city. And there are lots of resources and opportunities in terms of economic opportunities and jobs that are available, and also the cultural diversity that is here in Miami. And so we're hopeful to relaunch resettlement services in just the next several months. Excellent.
So my last question, is there anything else that you'd like to share, or maybe some other important information that you would like to just put out there for individuals?
Sure. There's one thing I always love to share, and this reveals the hat that I used to wear being an employment specialist and then managing an economic empowerment program, is the economic contributions of refugees in the country and also in the state of Florida. And I have some statistics to offer that refugees paid nearly $750 million in taxes in fiscal year 2019, that their spending power is $2.4 billion. And this is in Florida alone. And also just the fact that studies have shown again and again that refugees and immigrants, and specifically refugees, are very entrepreneurial, and they have a high rate of entrepreneurship and opening small businesses. And so there are 9,127 entrepreneurs who originally arrived in Florida as refugees. And so that is just some more, facts and statistics, just demonstrating the economic contributions that refugees provide, not only the social and cultural contributions.
Which, again, employment is such a key piece of the puzzle for so many. And so creating jobs, which also have, I'm sure, benefits sometimes, et cetera, is so critical. My last question would be, what if any, how can people get involved? What would you recommend to individuals if they want to start getting involved?
There are many ways. And so, there are always volunteer opportunities at the IRC in Miami and in Tallahassee, and I'm sure in other organizations in South Florida, like Refugee Assistance Alliance, which I'm sure we'll learn about soon. So volunteer opportunities, also monetary contributions are extremely helpful. Nonprofits have tight budgets, and we are extremely economic and efficient with the funds that we have. And so that is really often a powerful way to support our mission. And it looks like Linaire posted some additional information. So I appreciate that, Linaire. So if you could please email florida@rescue.org, you can learn about the different ways to provide support for our mission. Also, our website, rescue.org/giveflorida. So thank you.
Thank you, David. And remember, I just want to put it out there for everyone. Please, if you have a question, any question, now's the time, right? Ask it. You're here, you came here. We'd love to get you more involved and just make sure that you're getting the information that you need as well. So submit that through that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I'd like to transition now over to more of a local perspective, which I think is going to be amazing. And to do that, we have Kristen Bloom here with us, who is the founder of the Refugee Assistance Alliance, also known as RAA, based right here in Coral Gables, which is where I am. So right here in my backyard, basically. So Kristen, I'd love to just start, and I'm gonna switch it up a little bit because I want to start with you and ask that more personal question about what has prompted you or inspired you to launch the RAA.
Yeah, like David, I sort of fell into it, although I also have always had a passion for social justice and kind of helping the underdog, I would say. And when I moved to Miami, you probably saw from my profile picture, I am a military spouse. And so when I moved to Miami, I was looking for a way to get involved. And I learned that there are some new Syrian refugee families who needed help learning English. And I thought, oh, that's a great way for me to get involved. I had 2 young kids at the time, and I wasn't looking for a big full-time job. So I started teaching English with one of the families, and I went to their house that first day, prepared with my English lesson, and I spent 3 hours at their house, and we didn't even touch my English lesson because they brought out this huge stack of mail that they didn't understand. And after we went through it, I always tell people they don't know if it's junk credit card application or something important about their status, And then they brought out another stack of papers from school because they had 3 school-age kids. And then I found out the mom was pregnant, and there were just so many questions. And this family had been here in the US already for 1 year. And so when I got in my car that day, I just felt so overwhelmed, thinking, if I didn't go to their house that day, who are they saving those questions for? Who are they saving that stack of mail for? And I just felt that, sorry, Linaire, my volume's a little low. Can you guys hear me?
It's a little bit better. I didn't want to interrupt you, but yeah, the volume's a bit low. So I don't know if it's just moving a bit closer to your computer. I don't know if you have a microphone or
it's just your computer. Better?
It is a little bit better, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so, I felt so overwhelmed for this family, and I thought, for myself, I'm a military spouse. We've moved 9 times in 15 years. I've never been through the trauma that they've experienced, but I do know a lot about starting over. And I thought, for myself, I always have a military community to tap into. I've lived in Japan where I don't speak the language. I don't recognize any of the characters on signs anywhere, but I could say to my friends, how did you get your driver's license here? Where do you go to the dentist? And with this family that I met, I asked, do you know other families here? And they just told me a few other families who were also new. And so I just felt like, oh my gosh, they don't have that embedded community to tap into to offer them to support. And that's really how RAA got started. I thought, well, I don't speak Arabic and I, don't know how to fix your food stamps, but I know what to Google and I know how systems work in the US. And, I was born and raised in the US. And so I can help you figure it out. I don't have the answers to your questions, but I can get people together and we can help you kind of navigate your life here. So that's how
I love that, how it just sounds very grassroots to me, which is beautiful, that you're like, you know what, we're going to get you to the information that you need, right? We have Google and everything can be found basically. So yeah, that was such a beautiful story. And I totally can relate to you being married myself to a career diplomat. Of course, it's not the same level as any refugee is experiencing, but moving is disruptive. It's, I think, the number one stressor that people can experience when you really are picking up and moving. So imagine leaving one country to another. Just again, that level of stress that someone's experiencing is just, I think, immense. So let's talk about, what role does the RAA primarily play in supporting refugees right here in South Florida?
Yeah, so you heard David talk all about what resettlement agencies do, and Refugee Assistance Alliance is very much of a grassroots organization. And so we sort of pick up where resettlement agencies leave off. Resettlement agencies do so much to get refugees set up, enroll them in schools, get them set up with their benefits, all the things that David talked about. But most refugees only receive about 90 days of support, and then they're kind of on their own. And so, like I said, this family I met had been in the US for 1 year and they still had so many questions. I mean, I think any of us on this call after 90 days in a foreign country where we don't speak the language would be like, what? You're leaving me on my own? I'm not ready. And so we pair volunteer teams with the families in our program to really just help them navigate their life. We always joke that it's our goal to work ourselves out of a job with our families. We hope eventually they'll say, thank you, RAA, I don't need you anymore. Now I know how to figure out the system. Even if I don't know all the answers, I know where to find the answers. And we're also all about not reinventing the wheel. As David said too, Miami has so many resources. We're also a city where more than 50% of the population was born elsewhere. So people know what it's like to start over, like you were saying. And so that's a great reason, to bring volunteers in, and people can say like, oh, I've been in your shoes. I know how overwhelming it is. Don't worry, we'll get there. But we're really there to kind of offer that extended care, the extended welcome, and to just help them. David mentioned too, transportation and childcare. Our volunteers pre-COVID used to all go in home because of transportation and childcare being such an incredibly difficult challenge for so many people. And it is hard to access services when you don't have transportation, you don't have childcare, and you don't speak English. And in South Florida, a lot of places will call and say like, oh yeah, we can help them, have them come in, no problem. And we say, well, do you offer help in Arabic or in Dari or Amharic? And then it's like, oh no. So that's where, if it takes 10 times with our family to help them figure out how to do this thing on our own, we'll do it with them 10 times because we want to teach them, how to do it on their own. So.
And we talked about, David was able to share a lot of those kind of hurdles and obstacles that I know most refugees are facing, and I'm sure it is very similar. Would you say, is there anything unique to South Florida in terms of obstacles? And one thing that comes to mind to me is, it really is Spanish. Speaking Spanish is obviously very, very everyone speaks Spanish. I'd say like a majority of people really do speak Spanish, which presents, I think, another challenge on top, right? Which I know language and learning English is one of the biggest obstacles. And so would you say, is that something that might be unique to South Florida in terms of what obstacles or hurdles these refugees are facing?
Yes, definitely. At RAA, we actually focus on refugees from the Middle East, Asia, and Africa because they do have those additional hurdles because they don't speak Spanish or Creole. Because many of us who live in South Florida know that we'll see things in English, Spanish, and Creole all over the place. Actually, in a recent grant application, we were talking specifically about this language barrier, and that 70% of the population speaks Spanish or Creole as their native language, but 0.24% speaks Arabic, and 0.01% speaks Amharic. I mean, that's what we're up against here with the clients that we serve. And so it is, you know, people will say, oh yeah, we have that service. Yes, we have that service. But like I said, it's just helping them get across that barrier. I mean, language is very, very, very significant barrier. And in South Florida, it is unique that they're not only fighting against English, but also Spanish. I mean, even looking for jobs. Oh, you don't speak English, but this other person speaks Spanish, that person's going to get the job, you know, and it's very, very difficult. So yeah, I do think that that's something unique to where we are.
Thank you. And, you know, I know, David, I really love to hone in on this point too, about like, what are the benefits, right? Because I think a lot of times the narrative always sort of sometimes gets skewed towards like, what aren't the benefits? But I feel like, would you love to speak to this and share some of the benefits of supporting and integrating refugees into our local community? I'm sure the economic piece is one major piece, but I think reiterating that there are so many benefits is so important.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
I'm sorry, was that question for me or for Kristen?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, it was for Kristen. I was playing off of sorry, David, you had shared what those benefits are, especially the economic piece. But I'm all about, I think, reiterating what those benefits are, because I know a lot of people may have some myths or misconceptions. And so I think really playing that concept is critical.
Yeah, I mean, like David said, there is a huge economic benefit. And then something that we always point out, you know, sometimes refugees kind of get mislabeled, like they're just looking for handouts or this, that, and the other thing. And every single person in our program who I have met is the most resilient, courageous people. They don't want handouts. We will offer things to them and they say like, no, I don't want that. They want to make a life for themselves here. They're looking, like David said, they want to start a business, or they want to be able to do it on their own. And then another thing, I think like one of the most beautiful things of the work that we do is we hear from volunteers all the time. Wow, I signed up to help this family, but I think I'm getting way more out of this than they are, because we do see different things in the media. And then you meet a refugee up close and personal and you realize, wow, we have so many things in common. You know, they have been through this traumatic experience, but they want the same things for their kids that I do. And we like the same TV show and we listen to the same music, you know, now that they lived in the US for a while. And you just realize the common humanity that we all share. And when you hear their stories, you think like, gosh, that could have been me. If I think about this all the time whenever I travel, you know, if I were born here, like my life would be so much different. And when you work with these families up close and personal, I think that volunteers really just see that up close. And I
think that's a really powerful message that you just shared in terms of that human connection, right? And giving someone a chance. I think we're so quick sometimes to just judge versus just being open to the possibilities. And I know you were speaking about volunteers, which I'm sure they're passionate about this probably just as much as you are, and everyone here. But I feel like that is something that all of us can take away, is this idea of just being open and allowing ourselves to have that experience and that human connection. Because like you said, there's always probably so much more in common than there is that's different between us. So I think that's really beautiful. What would you say are the best ways that individuals can get involved with RAA?
Definitely volunteering. We're actually, like I said, we pair volunteer teams. We're looking for groups in the community who are interested in doing a community sponsorship program where we pair them with a family for 1 year and really help them, you know, like I said, with all the nitty-gritty stuff. Sometimes it's not beautiful, but it is so incredibly rewarding, like David said, to really just meet these families, and they do become part of your family. We have other volunteer opportunities too. Lanier will share in the chat our website. If you click on Get Involved, you can see all of our volunteer opportunities. And then also just donating you know, lots of people are reaching out right now because of the situation with all the Afghans coming into our country. We don't have any right now, but we do anticipate some coming, as much as a doubling or tripling of our numbers. But it's important to note that this is not going away. So we don't have any right now, but this is going to be a long process and months and years ahead. So donating and helping us get ready. We offer every single thing in our program free for our clients, and we will always do that. But we're a small nonprofit, and it takes a lot to keep us going. And so making a donation really, really does go a long way.
Thank you so much. So Lanier, I wanted to check in with you to see, do we have any, you know, what questions have we received?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. One question, they're curious about the experience of people that are on the front lines of welcoming refugees. And we do have someone, John Ward, retired U.S. diplomat and director of the World Affairs Council Miami, who can share about his recent experience. John, are you there? There he is.
Yeah, thanks, Lanier. And yes, I'm masked because I'm at Philadelphia International Airport, and I actually am on my way back to Miami, but arrived here in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago. And you know, thank you, David, and the IRC for the opportunity to work as a contractor for the past 2 weeks at Fort Dix, welcoming our Afghan allies and others. And I really just wanted to, you know, come on for a few minutes before boarding to, thank all of our partners of the World Affairs Council for, you know, being with us today, and for the opportunity to work with you going forward, and also just to provide my own personal testimony that the evacuees from Afghanistan that have arrived here, you've heard a lot about what their typical experience is, and yes, you know, they're just coming off the airplanes from Europe and from Qatar and other points. They're tired, they're scared, they're worried about their family members that were left behind. But I can tell you that, you know, they still have wonderful spirit and are warm and caring people, and are going to make great neighbors for us and citizens of our country. So I'd just like to reiterate, please, you know, however you can work with RAA or IRC or other organizations, please do keep in mind, as Kristen said, this is a long haul, and we're really just at the starting point. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. So it does look like, do we have time? Lanier, do we have time for like one question, or I know we're getting...
We have a couple of minutes here. There was an interesting question that came through about climate, and is that causing more influx of refugees from various regions? So I don't know who might want to answer that question.
Yeah, it is. It is an impact, as is the pandemic. Climate's been an issue for obviously quite some time, and it affects the very regions that are also more vulnerable to other kinds of disruptions like war and so forth, sub-Saharan Africa, et cetera. So yeah, and I think it's all part of the same story. People will be moving and displaced, and there are much larger numbers of people displaced than who are actually recognized refugees under UNHCR. So it's a bigger issue. It's an 80 million person issue, to be honest. Because I like to nerd out, I did find a report on that website that I shared about climate change. So and climate refugees, climate movements. I'll just pop that into the chat so people can do a little more research if they wish.
Thanks, Nancy. I know, I thought this was an interesting question, which I'm not sure if our panelists would know the answer, but we have someone who's anonymous who was asking about how do workers communicate with refugees? Is it using modern standard Arabic, or do they need knowledge in kind of local dialects?
I can get us started on that, and I'm not well versed in, you know, the linguistic subtleties of Arabic by any means, but this question can be applied to a lot of different languages for a lot of different populations from various countries. And so we are very mindful about the important difference between, let's say, modern standard Arabic and a local dialect. Whenever possible, we make sure to provide the most relevant and applicable language support that's available. And yeah, I can think of a number of examples of different populations from countries where that really makes a big difference. Sometimes there are cases when our clients do understand the quote unquote standard language. However, it represents the oppressive government that they are fleeing. And so we are very mindful of that as well in terms of, potentially triggering trauma. We do the very best we can. There are admittedly, there have been times when it's such a very specific localized dialect that we were not able to provide that. However, I will also say that, during the pandemic, there have been some silver linings in terms of efficiencies and connectivity between different organizations remotely. And so we've been taking advantage of utilizing interpreters that aren't necessarily based in Florida that provide interpretation via telephone, via Zoom call. And so that does expand our accessibility of those rare languages.
Thank you, David. And hopefully we can get this in. I think we still have time. One last question that's come through, which is, when refugees arrive and they're looking for housing and they don't have family, like you said, how most of the time there's a criteria that's being used in terms of where individuals get resettled. If they don't have a family or whatever, how is housing handled? Is that something that, what is the process around that?
Housing is a fundamental component of the refugee resettlement program and the cooperative agreement that IRC has with the State Department. Housing is secured ahead of time for families that come and that do not have family to join. There are rigorous standards, safety standards and quality standards when it comes to the housing that we identify. And I'll also say in terms of funding, part of that cooperative agreement, part of the refugee resettlement program, we agencies are funded by the State Department to provide these services. So we utilize those funds towards housing and other services. Those funds are limited, and often housing can be supported for a few months, sometimes up to 6 months. And very often after that, in terms of the financial assistance from resettlement organizations, there's not much more of, which is why employment and self-sufficiency is so very important. And I'll also just, add another bit in terms of employment, that self-sufficiency rates for newly arrived refugees are extraordinarily high. Around 90% of all refugees are self-sufficient within 6 months. So just an extraordinary feat, given all the obstacles that they face.
And I noticed let's try to get this in. I think, Lanier, we have one last question, which I think is hopefully an easy one, or maybe not, in the chat, is what is typically the immigration status of families being resettled?
I'll take this one. The easy answer is that refugees arrive as legal permanent residents in the U.S. on a path to citizenship. So they get their green cards and they can apply to be citizens within 5 years. Terms, immigrants, asylum seeker, all these terms get interchanged, but they actually have very, very distinct legal ramifications. But refugees arrive as legal permanent residents on a path to citizenship.
Thank you, Kristen. Well, Lanier, I'm going to hand it, I think, we've gone through all the questions unless something has come through, but I think I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. That was a very powerful discussion, and thank you, Kevin, for moderating such an excellent discussion. Thank you to our speakers and all the work that you've done and the work you continue to do to assist and welcome refugees during this critical time. I'd also like to thank our event partners, the Refugee Assistance Alliance, the International Rescue Committee, and Global Ties Miami. Here to make some closing remarks about this important topic is Dr. Athena Passera, President of our event partner, Global Ties Miami. Welcome, Dr. Passera.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lanier. And I want to begin my closing remarks by first of all saying thank you so much, Nancy, David, and Kristen, for the work that you do. Because having worked as a crisis intervention counselor and working with people that are essentially in crisis from the time you guys meet them and mobilizing resources for them and doing your work, it takes an emotional toll. And it is by no means easy work. So I just want to say I've been inspired by you. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And you can see me signing up pretty quickly to volunteer. I promise you I will be there and I will do as much support as I can in the South Florida region. And I'm sure many of the other attendees on this call probably feel exactly the same way after listening to this great program, this great event that was put on by the World Affairs Council of Miami. For those of you that are not familiar with Global Ties Miami, we are a South Florida-based nonprofit. Our mission is to improve international relationships through international exchange programs, summits, internships, educational initiatives, and also speaker events. Many of our international visitors are nominated through the U.S. Department of State's International Visitor Leadership Program. And over the years, Global Ties Miami has actually worked on many programs related to refugee resettlement, including programs for South Korea, Australia, Indonesia, Cambodia, just to name a few of them. We are so proud of the resources and the work being done here in our South Florida community, and it's really our honor to share that work with the rest of the world through U.S. State Department sponsored international exchange programs. Now, at the national level, Global Ties US, who is our umbrella organization, is working on creating programs that aid in the resettlement efforts by using this network of partners that we have across the country. At the moment, they're currently working on aiding at-risk former exchange participants from Afghanistan and other countries. In addition to this, Global Ties US is also working to address some of the short and long-term needs of refugees through visa processing and other relief efforts. But as we've heard today, it's clear that these efforts require a great deal of coordinated partnership with organizations that we have on this panel today. And I feel thrilled to be part of a community that is committed to working on effective refugee resettlement. If you'd like to know more about us as far as Global Ties Miami goes and support our work, please follow us on @Global Ties Miami, or you can visit us at globaltiesmiami.org to take advantage of our free membership and to stay connected. But I know that one thing I'll be doing as soon as we wrap this up is I'll be contacting and going to you guys' websites and signing up to be a volunteer. So thank you so much to the World Affairs Council, to John, Lanier, and Aaron for having us as a partner. And I will hand it back over to Lanier. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you so much, Dr. Pacera, and your team at Global Ties Miami. Thank you again to our partners. You've all been incredible. And thank you again, Kevin. This concludes our event today, but please reach out via the call to actions that were shared in the chat today. And we thank you for giving this important issue your attention and hope this meaningful dialogue will serve as a resource that will help to make a difference. Thank you all so much and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Have a good
Thanks
rest of
very
the
much.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a great day.